All right, I'll stall for a minute or two here, but because I wanted this, part of the reason I chose this location was for people like me who may be dropping kids off at classes, and sometimes I'd go and find the other classrooms were just full, and I thought it'd be good to, let's try one in here where you can just walk in whenever and come into a class. So we'll, hopefully some more people will trickle in here, but just to kind of give a recap, if you were not here last week, we're talking about how to figure out what is true. How do you have a framework for truth? What is the best way to tell truth from a lie? What is the best way to live your life in truth? And how do you find that out? So we talked about last week, one of the verses that we looked at was Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8, which of course says, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." So we talked about how truth is in the list. We don't often talk about truth being in the list. In fact, this week we're going to talk about how something else has kind of replaced truth as a higher priority, something else that we want in our lives more than truth. And so we're going to look at that today as we talk about utilitarianism. But we also wanted to make sure that as we talk about truth, we understand one basic thing, and that is truth is not always fun. Truth is not always fun. If someone, hey, Franklin, you got a big stain on your shirt, or hey, Franklin, you did this wrong. It's not always fun to hear you're wrong. I tell my kids, guys, you need to what do they say? I know. We don't like to hear the truth. And so we'll get defensive. There are a number of different tactics we use, right? We get defensive. We change the topic. We show those people how they're wrong. So we've got a lot of different tactics we use when it comes to people showing us the truth and we don't like it. But truth is not always fun, so let's keep that in mind as we continue to study about truth. Now, as we begin, I've been saying that I like to start off with a little interactive part, a little interactive portion, so we're going to play another round of two truths and a lie. So I'm going to show up on the screen three statements about various things, and I want you to tell me what you think is the lie, okay? All right, so for example, the first one, we're going to have some facts here about Southwest Church of Christ. So let's take a look here. All right, so here are three things about Southwest Church of Christ. Which one is the lie? Number one, Southwest started in 1962. Number two, Southwest has 8 shepherds. Number 3, Southwest phone number is 402-333-6536. All right, so you might have to know quite a bit to be able to decipher which one is the lie here. How many of you think the lie is number 1? How many of you think the lie is number 2? How many of you think the lie is number 3? Okay. Actually, the lie here is the 8 shepherds. I think we have 6 shepherds here at Southwest. It did start in about 1962, and that phone number should be on your speed dial at all times. All right, next one we're going to look at is this. 3 things about Omaha. Which one is the lie? Number 1, butter pecan ice cream was invented in Omaha. Number 2, the Reuben sandwich was invented in Omaha. Or number 3, Johnny Carson had his start on a radio show in Omaha. All right, how many of you think it's number 1, butter pecan ice cream was invented? That's the lie, okay. How many of you think number 2 was the lie, Reuben sandwich was invented? All right. How many of you think number 3 is the lie? Okay. So the lie here is that it's actually butter brickle ice cream that was invented in Omaha. Butter pecan was not invented in Omaha, but rumor has it the Reuben sandwich was based on a bet, and that came from someplace downtown, and that Johnny Carson actually had his start on a radio show here. All right, next one. 3 things about Nebraska. Which one is the lie? 1, the origin of Nebraska's name is from an old Indian word meaning flat plain. Number 2, Nebraska is both the nation's largest producer and user of center pivot irrigation. Or number 3, in 1927, Edwin E. Perkins of Hastings invented the powdered soft drink that we know as Kool-Aid. All right, how many of you think the lie is number 1? All right, how many of you think the lie is number 2? And how many of you think the lie is number 3? This is pretty cool because we're getting more spread out in some of our things. And I worked hard to make lies this week. So, the lie here is that the Indian word that it comes from actually means flat water, not flat plain. But it does come from an Oto Indian word meaning flat water, obviously because of the Platte and other places. They're not rolling rivers and things like that that we know. All right, next one. Here are 3 of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Which one is the lie? Is it the Great Pyramid of Giza? Is it the Colossus of Rhodes? Or is it Stonehenge? All right. How many of you think the lie is the Great Pyramid of Giza? How many of you think the lie is Colossus of Rhodes? Okay. And how many of you think the lie is Stonehenge? All right. So the answer here is that Stonehenge was actually not one of the wonders of the ancient world. It was kind of believed to have been built later. But Pyramids of Giza and Colossus of Rhodes were some of the originals that were on that list. All right, next one. Oh, I kind of threw a little hiccup here. 4 things this time. So 4 truths. Here are 4 of the top 10 attractions in Nebraska. Which one is the lie? Runza, Henry Doorly Zoo, Scottsbluff National Monument, or Joslyn Art Museum. So these are for the state of Nebraska. Obviously, which one of these is the lie? How many of you believe the lie is Runza? Actually, I might have a couple of lies in here, probably. Henry Doorly Zoo, is it one of the top 10 attractions or no? How many of you believe Scottsbluff National Monument may be a lie? Or the Joslyn Art Museum is a lie as one of the top attractions in Nebraska? Okay? So the lie here is, and I didn't highlight Runza as well, but it didn't make the list. But the lie here is actually Joslyn. I guess we don't have a whole lot of art lovers. It's not one of the top 10 attractions in the state of Nebraska, but Henry Doorly Zoo and Scottsbluff National Monument are in the top 10 attractions in the state. All right, so let's talk about utilitarianism. We're talking about how to figure out what is true and what is a lie. And the first system that we're going to look at is called utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is going to be very familiar to you because we use it quite often as a system of making decisions. Because pretty much the basis of utilitarianism is we are going to figure out what makes the biggest amount of people happy. And that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to decide is the right thing to do, is it makes the most amount of people happy. It takes care of the most amount of people, okay? So there's obviously good and bad when you come to this. I would say our country is based on democracy, right? We get to vote on things, and so you could say that democracy is a form of utilitarianism. We're trying to figure out what the biggest amount of people want, and that's what we're deciding is correct. And so we have this idea of what do the most amount of people want? You probably do this in your family. Where do we want to go eat tonight? And then inevitably the person with the biggest personality gets to choose, right? Everybody else, no, I don't like that. I don't want that. Had that yesterday. We're going to this. Some of us are very diplomatic. We want input from everywhere, and then we'll figure out, well, how about we do, and we sort of make some calculations, we make other offers, and then everybody's happy and we go do our thing. So you could say that democracy is a form of utilitarianism, but utilitarianism really is an interesting way when you think about a system of coming up with what is right and what is wrong. When we start to look at utilitarianism, we find several examples in the Bible. And so we're going to go through several examples of utilitarianism and kind of see how it's been used, how it's been abused, how it's been gone against, and we'll just see what the Bible has to say about this system of figuring out right from wrong, ethics. So to start out off, let's turn to Exodus. And we are going to be in Exodus, 32, I believe. Exodus 32. All right, so we're going to read Exodus 32 and go through about verse 25 here. So long reading, but let's look at Exodus chapter 32 together. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, remember he had gone up to speak to God, okay, about how are we going to become a nation. So he's up on this mountain talking to God, but apparently it took him a really long time. Moses was so long from coming down the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him." So Aaron answered them, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing, and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. And he took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. And then they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." So the next day the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. And afterward they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, because your people whom you brought up out of Egypt have become corrupt. They've been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it and have said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt.' I have seen these people," the Lord said to Moses, "and they are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them, and that I may destroy them, and then I will make you into a great nation." But Moses sought the favor of the Lord his God. "O Lord," he said, "why should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he brought them out, to kill them in the mountains and wipe them off the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self, 'I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever.' Then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster that he had threatened. Moses turned and went down the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hands. They were inscribed on both sides, front and back. The tablets were the work of God. The writing was the writing of God, engraved on the tablets. And when Joshua heard the noise of the people shouting, he said to Moses, "There's sound of war in the camp." And Moses replied, "It's not the sound of victory, and it is not the sound of defeat. It is the sound of singing that I hear." And when Moses approached the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, his anger burned, and he threw the tablets out of his hands, breaking them to pieces at the foot of the mountain. And he took the calf they had made and burned it in the fire, and he ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it. And he said to Aaron, "What did these people do to you that you led them into such great sin?" "Do not be angry, my lord," Aaron answered. "You know how prone these people are to evil. They said to me, 'Make us gods who will go before us.' As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." So I told them, 'Whoever has any gold jewelry, take it off.' Then they gave me the gold. I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf." Moses saw that the people were running wild and that Aaron had let them get out of control and so become a laughingstock to their enemies. All right, so what do we learn from this story? Moses goes up on the mountain. He's gone for a really long time. What happens when a leader sometimes is gone? There's a power vacuum, right? Same thing we're seeing in Afghanistan. As soon as one leader leaves, there's a good chance someone else tries to come in and take power. And this is no matter where you're at, right? This can be in a family. If there's a matriarch or a patriarch, someone that has died, either nobody or there will be somebody come in and say, "I'm taking over." So there's a good chance there will be a struggle for power. There's somebody going to come in and say, "We need to change the way we do things. This is what we're going to do." So Moses is not coming down. The people come to Aaron. They say, "Hey, Aaron, make us some new gods, because we don't know what's happened to this guy who said we should believe in God, we should do all this. He's not here." And so what is our view of Aaron as a leader based on this story?
He's a people pleaser.
Okay, very good. He's a people pleaser. So they come to him and they say, can you make us gods? And he says, "Okay, give me all your gold jewelry." And of course, what is the most hilarious line in the Bible, I think, is what he tells Moses happened whenever he took all the jewelry. And what does he say? "I put it in the fire and out popped this calf," right? And anybody that does any kind of work on this kind of thing knows that you have to shape these things. This is not something that's just going to come out the way that it is. So we have this view of Aaron, looking at him, that he is a people pleaser, that he has taken the pleasure of the most amount of people as the way that he's going to do things. Does this sound familiar? Okay, this is utilitarianism. He's saying, "I'm going to do this, and then the most amount of people will be okay with what we're doing." So when we start thinking about this, and we think about people pleasing as a leadership trait, which we have to think very seriously about. How are we leaders? And I've got to be honest, I struggle with this one. My personality trait desires to gain consensus from people in order to move forward. So this one is very difficult for me. But what do we need to remember about people's happiness and when it comes to right and wrong? We looked at Philippians chapter 8. Let's go there again and take a look. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8. This time let's read through verse 13. "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen from me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. And I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. So what are we supposed to be thinking about?
Well, I like verse 7 there where it starts out. It's the peace of God that we need to keep in our hearts.
Exactly, yes.
That's what the whole next section is about.
Exactly. The peace of God. Whatever's true, noble, admirable, all of those things. Why is whatever makes me happy not in that list? Why doesn't he say, here's what you should think about, whatever makes you happy? Now, let me ask this. What do you hear out there? What are we supposed to be thinking about? Don't you worry what other people think. You just do what makes you happy. That's not in our list as Christians. It's not in our list. Now, we believe that when you live the Christian life and you're following God, that peace or an enduring joy comes. Okay? Will our lives always be happy when we follow God? No. Following Jesus does not always equal happiness. And unfortunately, there are some churches that are teaching this. You follow God and everything is going to be amazing. We've got to be really careful about that doctrine. We've got to be really careful about the way that we teach and say, hey, come on in. Over here on this side, it's awesome. It's great because it may be good for you today. But tomorrow, when you have a moral dilemma, it may not be so fun. I think we need to temper a little bit what we're teaching people when it comes to following Jesus. We should quit teaching people that if they would follow Jesus, they will have instant, everlasting happiness. We must temper that with the truth. What did Jesus say? In this world, you will have trouble. But take heart, because I have overcome the world. This is what needs to be a central teaching of ours. You need to understand it's not always going to be fun, but you're going to have joy because you're following me, but it won't always be happiness. It won't always be this great mountaintop feeling. So we have to be careful on the way that we're teaching this. I love this quote, and I believe it came from William Barclay's commentary on the book of Luke. Jesus promised his disciples 3 things: that they would be completely fearless, absurdly happy, and in constant trouble. That's a pretty good assessment. All right? When you guys go into the world, you're going to have me, and so be fearless. Go into all the world. Preach the gospel. Tell people about me. And you're going to be happy because you're going to have the Holy Spirit with you. But you're going to be in trouble all the time. You're going to have hardships at every turn. And so if we go back to Philippians, it's kind of neat that he talks about, these are the things that you should talk about. In the very next part, he says, I've learned to be content in whatever the circumstance. So here's my question for us. If all of your happiness was stripped away today, would you be content with following Jesus? If all of your happiness was stripped away, will you still be good enough to follow Jesus? Is that still going to be good enough for you? And if it's not, we really need to sit down and examine if our relationship with Jesus is what's shaping and what's driving our sense of morality and our sense of right and wrong. Because Jesus never promised us that everything was going to be great until after. So it's coming. This is our hope. Too many times now we're saying, you've got to make the most of every day. This is your day. This is the day that everything's going to be great. Go out and do you. And that's not the Christian, that's not the teaching. The teaching is, it may not be so great here. It's going to be great. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be so great you can't even imagine. So that's one thing of utilitarianism that we have to be careful of, is when we say, we want to do this because this makes us happy. We have to be careful of that. All right, let's look at another example of someone who this time went against utilitarianism. And this one comes from the book of Judges. So let's turn over to Judges. And we'll be in chapter 6. Judges chapter 6, starting in verse 25. And this is the story of Gideon. Judges chapter 6, starting in verse 25. That same night the Lord said to him, "Take the second bull from your father's herd, the one 7 years old. Tear down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole beside it." Okay, let's lay a little groundwork. This is a time when God's people have turned away and they've decided, well, we've got these other nations around us that are worshiping other gods. Let's just worship them too, just so we got our bases covered. So you've got Gideon's father says, I'm also going to put up an altar to Baal and an Asherah pole. Asherah was a god of a nearby nation that they often shaped from like a log, kind of like this artist rendition you see here. They shaped from a log, and it was supposed to be in the shape of Asherah, one of the goddesses of a nearby nation at that time. And so this is what God is saying. I want you to go smash that altar. I want you to break down the Asherah pole. And then build a proper kind of altar to the Lord your God on the top of this height. So it was up on an elevated area where everybody could see it. Using the wood of the Asherah pole that you cut down. Offer the second bull as a burnt offering. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was afraid of his family and the men of the town, he did it at night rather than in the daytime. And in the morning, when the men of the town got up, there was Baal's altar demolished, with the Asherah pole beside it cut down, and the second bull sacrificed on the newly built altar. And they asked each other, who did this? And when they carefully investigated, they were told, Gideon, son of Joash, did it. The men of the town demanded of Joash, bring out your son. He must die because he has broken down Baal's altar and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. But Joash replied to the hostile crowd around him, are you going to plead Baal's cause? Are you trying to save him? Whoever fights for him shall be put to death by morning. If Baal really is a god, he can defend himself when someone breaks down his altar. So that day they called Gideon Jerubbaal, saying, let Baal contend with him, because he broke down Baal's altar. All right, what stands out to you about this particular story? Anything stand out? Okay, how quickly we can turn. All right. Other thoughts? Yeah.
It's fair to say he did it at night because he feared his father's household, and his father is the one that's defending him.
Okay. Yeah, an interesting twist there. He's like, I'm going to get in trouble, so I'm going to do this at night. And then his father ends up defending him. Okay, very good, interesting.
Rather than just living by the way that they knew they should, they chose to adapt to the rest of the world.
Okay.
Which is something that we tend to be doing right now.
Okay. Again, utilitarianism, right? What works best for the most people? So if it's kind of working for that mass of people out there, and we're this smaller group of people over here holding out doing our own thing, maybe we should adopt that. Good. Any other things that you see in there? All right. So we see that Gideon wasn't quite brave enough at this point to do this during the middle of the day. But I bet he had a pretty good idea that people would find out that it was him. But what I want you to think about is not just facing a crowd whenever you make a certain decision. What about facing your family? Whenever it's something that goes against them and what they believe. Now, it turned out well for Gideon in this case because Joash changed his mind. And this is one of the reasons that I loved working with young people for so many years is our young people have a desire to say, I'm going to follow God, I'm going to do this, let's go, let's make a change, let's change the world, let's do this. Sometimes at the opposite end of their parents, who say, well, let's not be too crazy, let's play it safe, let's do all this, and we've got our young people saying, we need to go out and we need to do this. And that's one of the people one of the reasons I love working with young people is they have this energy, they have this zeal that sometimes we lose as we get older. And so we see this Gideon saying, well, I'm going to do this, but I might get in trouble with my dad, and I'll probably get in trouble with the townspeople. But it's not always about what makes the most amount of people happy. It's what God has told me to do. It's what God has told me to do. So, we've talked about happiness as a part of utilitarianism that we have to be leery of. It's not just about being happy. But the other part is about following the crowd. Take a look at Exodus chapter 23 and verse 2. Exodus chapter 23 and verse 2. And it says this, do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. When you give testimony in a lawsuit, do not pervert justice by siding with the crowd. So do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. Probably one of the hardest commands in the Bible that we find. Because it is easy to follow the crowd. It is easy to do what the crowd is doing. How do you stand against a crowd? Now, what is different about a crowd rather than being by yourself or with a very small group of people? Think about being at a crowd, for example, that's at a concert or worshiping or in the streets of a demonstration. What is different about that than when you're by yourself or with a small group of people?
The mentality.
Okay, the mentality. Anyone care to elaborate more on that or give me some more?
You can typically control your emotions in a small group or alone, but when you're in a crowd, you tend to get
Okay.
caught up.
There's a loss of inhibition in a large group of people. For whatever reason, we can get in a big group of people and we can go, nobody knows me here. Right? Nobody knows me here. So we're at a demonstration and we decide, I'm going to be bold. I'm going to do some things. Or we're at worship and we're like, this is awesome, I'm going for it. Or we're at a concert and we're playing the air guitar because nobody else knows me around here. I can do what I want. There's a loss of inhibition. Other thoughts about being in a crowd?
There are always more followers than there are leaders.
Okay?
So in that instance, that's taking into account that not everyone in the following group has the same information.
Okay.
There are low info people as well as those with high info.
Okay.
There are those with none that are easily influenced.
Okay.
And that's the emotional impact that a leader can build up to get those people swayed to the other side.
Okay. So easily influenced, also we could say, I don't necessarily want to check the facts. I'm going to go and I'm going to be led by my heart, my gut, my feeling, whatever you want to call it, I'm not, what is everything that is going on here? Is it right? But when you're with a crowd, you're kind of pushed along, right, with everything else. Did I see a hand over here?
Yeah, there's always a justification of sin. Like, generally, you don't want to take, you don't want to say, yes, I sinned and it was bad. You want to say, oh, you know, it wasn't that bad. And there's more of that when there's a crowd. Because if everybody's doing it, it must be kind of okay.
Yeah.
So you justify what you're doing as you're doing it because everybody else is doing it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Again, utilitarianism. If everybody's doing it, how bad can it be? If everybody's believing this, it must be a true belief. And so again, we get back to that base idea of utilitarianism. Anything else you can think of about being in a crowd? What's the amount of energy in a crowd versus the amount of energy that you have?
Franklin, one of the things that I was often taught to avoid as a leader was something called the group thing. In other words, I can come in with facts and know the right thing to do, but I can let my other leaders in the group convince me that it'll be okay, Mike, we can do it this way.
Okay.
The Challenger crash was because of the group thing. Some of the nuclear accidents that happened in the world was because of the group thing. People knew better, but somebody would say, oh, the worst can't happen, don't worry about it. We'll be okay today.
Okay.
And so within that, I don't know if that's an energy thing, but it makes you feel so you don't have complete responsibility. So if it does happen to go wrong, well, I try to tell them.
Okay. So what he was saying is you have a responsibility and you believe you know what's right, but because we're programmed sometimes to say, well, what does everybody else think? Then they talk us out of that. So talking about energy, your energy going into that may be, I'm up here, I believe this is the right thing to do. But whenever other people start speaking, what happens? I'm losing energy to put forth that effort. It takes a lot of energy to go against a crowd, right? It takes a lot of energy to go against a crowd. It is not a popular thing to do, to stand in front of a crowd and say, you are wrong. Enter a story here that I would like to share about a monk during the Roman times of the arena, when the gladiators were fighting against each other, named Telemachus. And this was recorded by the church historian Theodoret of Cyrus in the Ecclesiastical History, and this is what he wrote. Honorius, who inherited the empire of Europe, put a stop to the gladiatorial combats which had long been held at Rome. The occasion of his doing so arose from the following circumstance. A certain man of the name Telemachus had embraced the ascetic life. He was a monk. He had set out from the east and for this reason had repaired to Rome. And there, when the abominable spectacle was being exhibited, he went himself into the stadium and stepping down into the arena, endeavored to stop the men who were wielding their weapons against one another. The spectators of the slaughter were indignant and inspired by the triad fury of the demon who delights in those bloody deeds, stoned the peacemaker to death. But when the admirable emperor was informed of this, he numbered Telemachus in the number of victorious martyrs, and he put an end to that impious spectacle. This is a sad story. It took the death of someone in order to put an awful, awful thing to a stop. Does that sound really familiar to you? It took the death of someone. How much energy does it take to stand against a crowd and say, no, that's wrong? Can you think of others in history that went against the crowd, even if it was an unpopular opinion that later became respected? there are several people I think about, but I think about, like Martin Luther King. This is, just because we do things this way doesn't mean this is the way it should be done. And often what happens with the people that stand against the crowd? They lose their life. Telemachus. You look at all the people in history that have said, what you believe, look at those who went against the early church. What you believe is not right, and they end up losing their lives because they're challenging. They're saying this is not correct. All right. So how do we deal with utilitarianism? Let me throw you another moral dilemma. Okay. So we did some moral dilemmas last week. We'll do another one. Let's say that there are 3 people that are going to a certain doctor, okay? And all 3 of these people are in very, very poor health, but their health could improve if they had an organ transplant. So these 3 people come in, they each need a different organ that will save their lives and they will live. Now, you go to the doctor and you have the sniffles. And the doctor says, this person has the sniffles but has an organ that could benefit each of these 3 people. So, I could take this person's life and give them something that will cause them to die. We could harvest their organs, and by the death of one, we could save 3. Now, how many of you are going to go to this doctor? So, we have to be careful when we look at utilitarianism. And again, I have a problem with this because sometimes I'll flip over to utilitarianism to make a choice. But we have to be careful with it because just because the most people, it will help the most people, or it looks like it's the best thing for a lot of people, doesn't necessarily mean it's right. So sometimes with this particular case, we can come up with rules. So we can apply certain rules like, well, doctors can't kill a patient in order to save others. And then we feel better about our ethical decisions about utilitarianism. So in the main thing, we have utilitarianism, but then there's a rule to support it, which is doctors cannot kill people. And then we go, okay. But then what happens? Then you start having to make all these other rules, right? To help support your ethical theory. But why do we still feel uneasy about certain things, even if we have rules beneath them? We had, I don't remember if I told this, the dilemma last week of there's a dying father and he comes to you and he says, I'm dying, but I've got a son that's off and I want you to give all the money to him. And so he gives you this large amount of money, you take the money and you say, okay, and you go and you find out that the son is a piece of garbage. Do you give him the money? You promised the father to give him the money. Do you give him the money when you find out what kind of person that he is? So we might go, it would benefit a lot more people if we did better things with the money. But there's still something that sits uneasy with you, right? Because you're a Christian, you're like, I'm not supposed to lie. So how do we gauge that? How do we do that? And that's where we're going to go into next week. That some things, no matter the outcome, just seem wrong. So this is what we've looked at today is an outcome-based ethical theory. Well, we do whatever leads us to the best outcome. So next week we're going to talk about deontology, but I want us to think, again, as we wrap up looking at utilitarianism, just because the most amount of people believe something or whatever does not make it right. Nations have been led astray by one person that had a theory that something was right or something was wrong. Many people have lost their lives because, you know what? One person said, I don't like that group of people. Let's wipe them off the face of the earth. And then whole groups of people came in to believe that.
You were talking about Martin Luther King. I have 2 quotes from him. One of them says, many people fear nothing more terribly than to take a the tendency to adopt a view that is so ambiguous that it will include everything and so popular that it will include everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great quote. All right, so as we wrap up thinking about utilitarianism, we're gonna look at another system of ethics next week. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your input. We will see you again next week.